I've been having a comment exchange with Medium Answer in one of the old videos I made to Rocking Mystery, and we're discussing mathematics and stuff. And how far back should I go? Well, anyway, I'll just go to the last comment. Relativists don't reason from principles, but rather from probabilities. They argue that since particular models of the world seem to match empirical observation, they're true enough. It's a very pragmatic attitude, one quite suited to science. But philosophy is not science. Indeed, metaphysics is a higher discipline than physics. So relativists can't collaborate with classical reasoners, just as atheists can't collaborate with normal people. Atheists, 3.8% of the world. I mean, it has to do with this compelling. He also commented on compelling. So I had said, you can justify the decision because it aids survival, and this is built in interest to the being in question. You can justify the belief that fire will burn by the fact that you are more careful around fire. If you believe that, and if you're not, you get burnt. And innately, you don't like getting burnt. You don't have to justify that dislike. It's a principle you begin with whether you like it or not. Einstein has a quote on mathematics and reality that I quite like. And he says, sure, you could say that, but it's opinion, not absolute truth. We could say with Ayn Rand, anything that aids survival is a moral good, and this would be reasonable, but it's not absolute truth. It doesn't compel universal agreement, like metaphysical claims. E.g., two things equal to the same thing are equal to each other. Psychopaths may object to survival, but no one can oppose a true metaphysical principle without destroying his own ability to reason from principles. And this is what, at Berkeley, in my philosophy degree, they really, this was one of the main arguments I had with them, is that they wanted to teach us how to make compelling arguments. And I'm like, I want to learn how to make good arguments. But this compelling, what is your point? And it comes up all the time. People are like, oh, well, you could say that your knowledge that fire burns is more true than my knowledge that the moon is made of cheese, and I even believe you, but you can't prove that with relativistic things. You need the blah, 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 blah. And I'm generally like, why are you asking me for facts that'll make you agree with me when you don't? Don't you know that's what Socrates got punished for, convincing kids things they didn't really believe. Compelling, we need an argument to compel others and force them to agree with us. No, we don't. I look for answers that satisfy me, and then I tell you out of the kindness of my heart, hey, look, maybe you'll make sense of this. And sometimes people do. It's like, oh yeah, I see that as well in my experience. And some people are like, no, I don't get that. And that's fine. Compelling is not for intellectual arguments. And that's the purpose of metaphysics, just like having a god or something, is to compel, is to convince other people. And people just need to focus on convincing themselves and getting their own mechanisms by which they become convinced, working properly. It's always the other person. We need a epistemology where we can force our solipsistic knowledge onto other people. Okay, well, speak for yourself. I don't need that. I'm perfectly willing to share information, to share methodology, to all share what we've learned about getting knowledge and letting each of us convince ourselves as to the validity of it. And that's compelling enough. See, if I see somebody say something and then act on it and it succeeds, they don't have to come and prove to me that I should try it. I could decide for myself if the goal and everything else suits me. But people have wanted metaphysics the same reason they wanted God, in order to have a big ass stick to beat other people with. And a lot of times it seems to me people react to me really negatively because it's like I refuse to have that big stick, and yet I still make these so-called compelling arguments. It's kind of like metaphysics. I don't go for making them compelling in that traditional sense, like following from an undeniable truth. Like two things equal to the same thing or equal to each other. See, that just doesn't work in reality. That's not an absolute truth from reality. Two things equal to the same thing or equal to each other. For example, the way species are defined, you can have 5 species, A, B, C, D, and E. A and B can interbreed. B and C can interbreed. D and E can interbreed. E and F, if there was an F, could interbreed. But A can't interbreed with F. So the fact that A can interbreed with C, or B, and B can interbreed with C, that means A and C should be in the same category, right? Because these species are defined this way. But they're not, because those two species are close enough to breed, but get a little further, and even though the whole chain can breed with each other one link away, you can't breed 2 or 3 links away. It breaks the categorization. How do you put something in the species? You see, it means that the statement that organism J is species F, it breaks this kind of thing down because it depends. There is no in or out of the species. It's not commutative. Categories, real categories in real life, the way they're really used, they're not commutative the way they are in mathematics. Because mathematics ignores these problems and wraps them up so that they can have a clean little system. And I have particular beliefs of why that turns out to be a valuable and advisable thing, but we misinterpret what we're doing. In mathematics, we think we're making something super exact by getting these, exact truths, but really, the truths as they apply to the real world are not so exact. And what we're doing is we're turning statements that are actually more true, that apply to reality better, and we're cleaning them up so they have these analytical properties, and we're making them approximations of the real world. They're very good, clean approximations because it creates a modeling world that's very consistent. So you can work in this world and kind of know what you're dealing with and not worry about the real world until you come back with your more complete system and apply it to the real world, where you can start to take into account the issues of applied mathematics. So it compartmentalizes the kind of thinking and when you have to do the thinking on a particular problem, if you can do some of your analysis mathematically or logically, by analogy. But it's not a more pure, higher truth. It's a lesser, more approximate truth. It's more practical, ironically. You take these analytic truths because they're easier to think about. There's less details, and your mind can think about a bigger scale by ignoring detail. And the only person that needs to be compelled and do the compelling is an individual to themselves. That's all that you need. We don't need any truths that force other people at all. And when it comes time to compel someone, it's only about behavior, like a thief. Like this guy was saying, well, it'll never get a psychopath to agree. You'll never get a psychopath to agree with your metaphysical thing or anything, or who even cares? Psychopaths are not really good intellectual collaborators, right? I don't have to compel a psychopath to believe some truth, analytic truth. I want to convince them that if they are violent or perform any criminal acts, that we'll throw them in jail. That we'll have a shootout on the muddy Main Street. Me versus you. It's not an intellectual contest at that point. Don't frame your intellectual contest as though you're trying to convince people that aren't even sane. I mean, don't even try to convince people that aren't honest. Rely on other people's honesty. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's impractical because people aren't honest. Right. And they doom themselves, though. You can rely on their honesty, and then it's up to them to understand or not. Is that compelling?